The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wider than most starships and reached higher than the tallest towers on civilized worlds, its crystal walls catching light from 3 different suns that filtered through the orbital stations. Protective shields and cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor where representatives from 47 different species sat in their specially designed chairs that accommodated everything from the gas-breathing whisper folk to the silicon-based rock walkers who needed heated stone platforms to survive Ambassador. Tae-ho from the Meridian Coalition stood at the center-speaking platform, his blue-scaled hands gesturing toward the massive holographic display that showed star charts and planetary data, his voice carrying the slight musical quality that all his people possessed when they spoke the common galactic language. And today, he had come to discuss something that most council members considered barely worth their time. Honored representatives, Tae-ho began, his crest feathers shifting from blue to purple as they always did when he felt nervous. I bring before this council a proposal for mineral extraction rights on a planet designated as Sol 3, commonly known in our databases as Earth. A ripple of soft sounds moved through the chamber as various species expressed amusement in their own ways, the floating ones releasing small puffs of sweet-smelling gas while the crystal singers made tiny chiming noises that sounded like distant bells, because everyone knew about Earth, and everyone knew it was one of the most dangerous places in the known galaxy. Representative Bo-Ram from the Stellar Assembly, her long neck swaying as she turned her large eyes toward Tae-ho, made the clicking sound that her people used for laughter, and spoke in her high, flute-like voice. That death trap you speak of appears on every star chart with warning symbols that even our youngest children learn to recognize, friend Tae-ho, and for good reason, since the atmospheric readings alone show radiation levels that would kill most of us within minutes and chemical compositions that would dissolve our protective suits before we could even land. The Rockwalker representative, whose name could not be spoken by any organic throat but translated roughly to Stone Who Thinks, rumbled agreement through the floor vibrations that his people used for communication, sending tremors through the chamber that the translation devices converted to words. 3 exploration fleets have been lost attempting to survey that cursed world. Their final transmissions, speaking of impossible weather patterns and atmospheric conditions that changed faster than their equipment could adapt. Tae-ho's feathers shifted to a determined orange as he touched the control panel and brought up detailed mineral scans, the holographic display showing rich deposits of rare metals and energy crystals buried deep beneath the planet's surface. Wealth beyond imagination if it could somehow be extracted safely from that nightmare world. The preliminary surveys showed deposits of trilithium, quantum crystals, and even traces of dark matter residue, Tae-ho continued, his voice growing stronger as he focused on the potential profits. The value of these resources would fund colony expansion for 1,000 cycles, and provide energy sources for worlds that currently depend on dangerous stellar mining operations. Senior Counselor Wu Jin from the Central Worlds, ancient even, by the standards of his long-lived species, raised one withered hand to speak, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the wisdom that came from watching the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Young Tae-ho speaks of wealth, but he forgets the cost. And the cost of approaching Earth has always been total loss of life. The chamber fell silent as Wu Jin activated his own display, showing the historical records of every attempt to explore or colonize the planet that galactic civilization had designated as the ultimate wasteland, a place where nothing civilized could possibly survive and where death waited in every breath of poisoned air. The first expedition, led by Captain Vex 9 of the Android Collective, reported equipment failure within hours of entering the system. Wu Jin continued, his ancient eyes reflecting memories of reports that had chilled the galaxy. Their final transmission spoke of gravitational anomalies and radiation storms that overwhelmed their shielding. but they had not even reached the planet's surface when all contact was lost. The floating jellyfish-like drifters pulsed nervous colors as their representative added, "The second expedition tried a different approach, sending unmanned probes first, but the probes malfunctioned as soon as they entered the planet's atmosphere, their sensors reporting impossible readings that suggested the very air was poison and the ground itself was hostile to all known forms of life." Boram's neck twisted in the gesture her people used to show deep concern as she accessed her own records. The third expedition was the largest and most well-equipped, led by the legendary explorer Captain Morseth of the Void Runners, who had successfully mapped 17 previously unknown systems and established contact with 5 new species. But even his expertise could not overcome whatever horror waits on that world. The holographic display changed to show Captain Morseth's final transmission, a ghostly blue figure speaking words that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. For their stark terror, "We have encountered something impossible on this world, creatures that move through the poisonous atmosphere as if it were harmless, beings that seem to thrive in conditions that would kill us instantly, and the sounds they make suggest intelligence, but an intelligence so alien and terrifying that we dare not attempt contact." The transmission cut to static after that, and no trace of Captain Morseth or his crew had ever been found, despite extensive search operations that had risked even more lives in the attempt to learn what had happened to them on the surface of the deadly world. "The atmospheric analysis speaks for itself," added Dr. Yan Su, the Council's chief xenobiologist, her tentacles shifting through data displays with practiced efficiency. "The air contains compounds that would burn through our respiratory systems, radiation levels that would cause cellular breakdown in civilized species within hours, and weather patterns so violent that they make the storm worlds look like peaceful gardens." Teho's feathers dimmed to a defeated gray as he realized his proposal was failing. But he made one last attempt to convince the Council that the potential rewards justified the enormous risks. "Surely our technology has advanced since those early expeditions, and with proper shielding and robotic mining equipment, we could extract the resources without risking organic life." The chamber filled with the sounds of disagreement from dozens of different species, as representatives recalled their own civilizations' encounters with worlds far less hostile than Earth, and how even those had claimed lives and resources that could never be recovered. "The gravitational field alone would crush most of our robotic equipment," rumbled the stone who thinks through floor vibrations that made the chamber tremble. "And the electromagnetic interference reported by the probe. Missions would disable any electronic systems we might send to the surface. The chemical composition of the atmosphere would corrode even our most advanced materials," chimed the Crystal Singer representative, her voice creating harmonies that spoke of deep concern. "And the temperature variations recorded suggest a world where conditions change too rapidly for any equipment to adapt." Representative Komin from the Merchant Guild, whose people had built their civilization on trade and profit, stood to address the chamber with the practical concerns that drove galactic commerce. "Even if we could somehow extract these resources, the cost of developing technology capable of surviving Earth's conditions would exceed the value of any materials we might recover, making this venture not just dangerous, but economically impossible." The debate continued for another hour as various representatives shared stories from their own species' encounters with dangerous worlds, but none had faced anything quite like Earth, a planet that seemed designed by some cruel cosmic force to be as hostile to civilized life as possible. Finally, Wu Jin called for the vote that everyone knew was coming, his ancient voice carrying the authority of his position and the weight of galactic law, all in favor of maintaining Earth's current classification as a restricted wasteland and denying extraction rights. The voting display lit up with the symbols representing 46 different species, with only Teho's lone descent showing in defiant orange against the sea of agreement that filled the chamber. "The motion carries," Wu Jin announced, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber and across the galaxy, through the communication networks that connected all civilized worlds. "Earth remains classified as a wasteland world, quarantined for the safety of all galactic civilization, and no further proposals for exploration or resource extraction will be considered until such time as the danger to civilized life can be eliminated." Tae-ho gathered his data displays and left the chamber with his head held high despite his defeat. But as he walked away, none of the representatives noticed the small notation that appeared in the galactic database, a routine update from the automated monitoring systems that tracked all known worlds. The notation was brief and would have seemed unimportant to anyone who saw it, just another data point in the vast collection of information about the deadly world, but it marked the beginning of a DI. 6 months after the council meeting where Ambassador Tae-ho's proposal had been so thoroughly rejected, junior analyst Mi Young sat in the observation station's data processing center, surrounded by walls of monitoring screens that tracked the electromagnetic signatures from thousands of star systems across the galaxy, her job involving the mind-numbing task of reviewing automated sensor reports and flagging anything unusual for senior staff to examine. Most of the data was routine, the expected patterns of stellar radiation and planetary magnetic fields that had remained unchanged for millennia. But today, something in the Sol system readings made her pause and look more carefully at information that should have been as boring and predictable as every other report she had processed during her 3 years of service. The readings from Sol 3, the wasteland world that everyone called Earth, showed electromagnetic patterns that were definitely not normal stellar or planetary activity, organized signals that pulsed and varied in ways that suggested they were artificial rather than natural phenomena, but that should have been impossible on a world where nothing civilized could survive. Mi Young checked the readings 3 times, comparing them against the baseline data from previous months and years, and each comparison confirmed what she was seeing but did not want to believe, that something on the surface of the deadly world was generating structured electromagnetic radiation patterns that looked exactly like the signatures of advanced technology. The signals were not random bursts of energy or the chaotic emissions that might come from natural electrical storms, but organized transmissions that followed patterns and protocols that suggested intentional communication between different sources on the planet's surface. And some of the patterns even looked similar to the basic radio frequencies that young civilizations used before they developed quantum communication systems. Mi Young's hands trembled as she expanded the analysis parameters and requested deeper scans from the automated monitoring arrays, knowing that what she was seeing could not be real, but unable to ignore the evidence that continued to accumulate with each new data sweep. The expanded analysis revealed even more disturbing information, showing not just communication signals, but also energy patterns consistent with industrial activity, massive power generation systems, and what appeared to be primitive but functional spacecraft moving in orbit around the planet, all of which suggested a thriving technological civilization on a world that should have been completely uninhabitable. She tried to find rational explanations for the readings, checking for equipment, malfunctions, or interference from solar activity, but the monitoring systems were functioning perfectly, and the signals were too consistent and organized to be caused by natural phenomena or technical glitches. The spacecraft signatures were particularly troubling, showing objects that moved in controlled orbits and periodically changed position in ways that indicated intelligent guidance rather than random debris. And some of the larger objects appeared to be space stations or orbital facilities that had been constructed using primitive but effective engineering techniques. Mi Young realized that she was looking at evidence of something that every expert in galactic civilization had declared impossible. A species that had not only survived on the wasteland world, but had somehow developed spacefaring technology while living in conditions that would kill any known form of civilized life. She spent hours double-checking her analysis and running, additional scans before finally accepting that the data was accurate and that she would have to report her findings to the senior staff, knowing that they would probably think she had made some terrible mistake or that her equipment was malfunctioning. The next morning, Mi Young stood nervously in the briefing room where Chief Science Officer Hei Wan and 3 other senior analysts sat around a polished table, their faces showing the skeptical expressions that she had expected when she requested this emergency meeting to discuss her findings. "You are telling us," Hei Wan said slowly, her voice carrying the patient tone that teachers used when dealing with particularly confused students, "that you have detected signs of technological civilization on Sol 3, the planet that has been classified as uninhabitable for over 2 centuries. Mi Young activated the holographic display and showed them the electromagnetic readings that had kept her awake all night. The organized signal patterns and energy signatures that painted a picture of impossible activity on the deadly world. The readings are consistent across multiple sensor arrays," she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she presented the evidence that she had verified dozens of times. "These are not natural phenomena or equipment malfunctions, but structured signals that indicate advanced technology and organized civilization." Senior analyst Kyung Ho, whose specialty was monitoring primitive civilizations on newly discovered worlds, leaned forward to examine the data more closely, his expression changing from skepticism to confusion as he recognized patterns that he had seen before in his studies of developing species. "These frequency patterns," he said quietly, pointing to specific sections of the display. "They match the early radio transmissions that most species use before they develop quantum communication. But the power levels are far higher than anything we have seen from primitive civilizations." Heiwan's skepticism began to waver as she realized that her most experienced analysts were taking the readings seriously. But she still could not accept what the data seemed to be telling them about the wasteland world. "Even if these readings are accurate," she said, her voice showing the strain of trying to reconcile impossible evidence with established scientific knowledge. "Nothing could survive on that world long enough to develop technology, let alone build the kind of civilization that these signals suggest." Mi Young had anticipated this objection and had prepared additional evidence that made the situation even more disturbing, activating new displays that showed the scope and complexity of the electromagnetic activity they had detected. "The signals are not coming from a small settlement or research station," she explained, her voice growing stronger as she presented evidence that had shocked her when she first compiled it. "They are coming from multiple locations across the entire planet, suggesting a global civilization with populations in the millions or possibly billions." The room fell silent as the senior staff absorbed this information, staring at readings that suggested not just survival on the deadly world, but a thriving planetary civilization that had somehow mastered technologies that allowed them to live and prosper in conditions that would be instantly fatal to any galactic species. Chief Communications Officer So Jin, who had been quietly reviewing the signal patterns, spoke up with a discovery that made the situation even more alarming. "Some of these transmissions are directed towards space, not just planetary communications, but signals being broadcast beyond their solar system, which suggests they may be aware of life on other worlds." The implications of this discovery sent a chill through the room as everyone realized that they might be dealing with a species that not only survived on the wasteland world, but had developed technology sufficient to detect and possibly contact galactic civilization. "We need to inform the Council immediately," Heiwan declared, her scientific training overcoming her disbelief as she accepted that the evidence was too strong to ignore. "This changes everything we thought we knew about Sol 3 and the possibilities for life in extreme environments." Within hours, emergency messages were transmitted across the galaxy to every member world of the Galactic Council, priority communications, that carried news so shocking that many recipients initially dismissed them as pranks or technical errors. The messages contained detailed scientific analysis of the electromagnetic readings from Sol 3, verified by multiple independent sensor arrays and confirmed by the most experienced xenobiologists and communication specialists in galactic civilization. Council chambers across 47 different worlds erupted in confusion and debate as representatives struggled to understand how their most fundamental assumptions about the wasteland world could have been so completely wrong. Senior Counselor Wu Jin, despite his advanced age and normally calm demeanor, found himself pacing in his private office as he reviewed the reports that seemed to overturn centuries of established scientific knowledge. How could we have been so blind? He wondered aloud to his aide, a young crystal singer whose harmonious voice reflected her own confusion and concern. We have been monitoring that system for hundreds of years, and somehow we missed the development of an entire civilization. The aide's musical tones carried uncertainty as she replied, perhaps they were always there, hidden beneath the electromagnetic interference that we attributed to natural phenomena. Or perhaps they developed so recently that our previous scans missed the early stages of their technological advancement. Emergency sessions were called in council chambers throughout the galaxy as representatives demanded answers and explanations for how such a massive oversight could have occurred. But the scientific evidence was undeniable, and the implications were staggering. Dr. Yunji, the council's most respected xenobiologist, was summoned from her research station to provide expert analysis of what kind of species could possibly survive and thrive on the wasteland. Captain Jae-sung stood on the bridge of the stealth reconnaissance vessel Silent Observer, watching the view screen display the distant yellow star that the galactic databases designated as Sol, his mandibles clicking nervously as his insectoid species always did when facing the unknown, while around him his carefully selected crew of specialists prepared their equipment for what might be the most important observation mission in galactic history. The Silent Observer had been designed specifically for deep space reconnaissance, its hull coated with metamaterials that absorbed electromagnetic radiation and made it virtually invisible to most sensor systems, while its advanced detection arrays could analyze planetary conditions from distances that kept the crew safely away from any potential dangers. Maintaining position at the edge of the system's outer asteroid belt, reported Navigation Officer Kyung-ho, his 6 arms working smoothly across the control panels that kept their position stable while they remained hidden among the rocky debris that orbited the distant star. All stealth systems functioning normally, and no indication that our presence has been detected. Communication Officer So-jin, her translucent skin shifting through pale colors that indicated concentration, monitored the electromagnetic spectrum for any signs that the mysterious inhabitants of Sol 3 had noticed their arrival, but the radio transmissions from the planet continued their normal patterns without any indication of alarm or increased military activity. The signal patterns we detected from galactic monitoring stations are definitely coming from the 3rd planet, she reported, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species while her tendrils manipulated the sensitive equipment that analyzed the alien communications. But the complexity and volume of transmissions far exceed what our preliminary analysis suggested. Jae-sung activated the main display screen and watched as the image of Sol 3 appeared before them. A blue and white sphere that looked almost beautiful from this distance, showing none of the deadly characteristics that had made it legendary throughout galactic civilization as the ultimate wasteland. Begin long-range atmospheric analysis, he ordered, his compound eyes focusing on details that would have been invisible to species with simpler visual systems. I want to confirm the environmental readings that classified this world as uninhabitable before we proceed with closer observation, Dr. Haewon, the mission's xenobiologist, began her scans with equipment so sensitive that it could analyze atmospheric composition from millions of kilometers away. But what she found made her question whether their instruments were functioning properly. Captain, she said slowly, her voice showing the confusion that her readings had caused. The atmospheric composition matches the deadly parameters from our historical records, but the distribution patterns suggest that something is actively managing and controlling the chemical balance. The atmosphere that should have been a chaotic mixture of toxic gases instead showed signs of careful regulation, with pollutants being processed and cleaned by what appeared to be both natural and artificial systems, while oxygen levels remained stable despite industrial activity that should have depleted them long ago. "How is that possible?" Jae-sung asked, his mandibles clicking faster as he processed information that challenged everything he thought he knew about planetary ecology. No natural system could maintain atmospheric stability under such hostile conditions. Unless, Dr. Haewon replied, thoughtfully, the inhabitants have developed environmental management technologies far beyond anything in our experience, or unless they have somehow modified their planet's natural systems to support their survival. Weapons specialist Chang Min, whose species had evolved on a world with predators that required constant vigilance, studied the orbital environment around Sol 3 with the paranoid attention to detail that had kept his people alive for millennia. "Captain, I am detecting multiple artificial objects in orbit around the planet," he reported, his gravelly voice carrying concern as his scans revealed the scope of activity in the space around the dangerous world. "These are not natural satellites but constructed facilities, and some of them appear to be armed with primitive but potentially effective weapon systems. The orbital structures were crude by galactic standards, built with materials and techniques that most civilized species had abandoned centuries ago, but they were functional and showed signs of continuous expansion and improvement over many years. The inhabitants are definitely spacefaring," Sojin added as she analyzed communication patterns between the surface and orbital facilities, "but their technology appears to be developing along completely different lines from any species in our records. Instead of the quantum-based systems that most galactic civilizations used, the Sol 3 inhabitants relied on electromagnetic radiation and chemical propulsion that seemed primitive but surprisingly effective for their purposes." "Take us closer," Jae-sung ordered, overriding the safety protocols that warned against approaching the deadly world, but maintain maximum stealth and be prepared for immediate withdrawal if we are detected. As the silent observer moved deeper into the Sol system, the crew began to see details that made them question everything they thought they understood about life in the galaxy. The third planet was not a barren wasteland, struggling to support a few scattered survivors, but a thriving world covered with massive cities that stretched across entire continents, their lights visible even through the poisonous atmosphere that should have made surface habitation impossible. "Those population centers," Dr. Haewon whispered, her voice filled with awe as she calculated the scale of civilization they were observing. "They must house millions of individuals, possibly billions, all living in conditions that would kill any galactic species within minutes." The cities were connected by transportation networks that moved across land, sea, and air with efficiency that spoke of advanced engineering and careful planning, while industrial complexes processed raw materials and energy on a scale that matched the output of entire galactic sectors. "Look at their aircraft," Chang Min said, his voice showing the professional interest of someone who understood military technology. "They fly through atmosphere that would corrode our best materials, and they do it routinely as if it were no more dangerous than traveling between planets in our ships. The aircraft moved through storms that generated electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to disable galactic technology, while atmospheric pressures and chemical compositions that would crush and dissolve most known materials seemed to have no effect on the strange vehicles, Captain," Sojin called urgently, her tendrils working rapidly over her communication equipment. "I am intercepting transmissions that appear to be entertainment broadcasts, and the content is unlike anything in our cultural databases. The broadcasts showed the inhabitants of Sol 3 engaging in activities that would be considered extreme survival training by galactic military standards, but they were presented as recreational entertainment that ordinary citizens watched for. pleasure. They are showing individuals deliberately exposing themselves to their star's radiation. Sojin continued, her voice showing disbelief at what she was seeing. Not as punishment or survival training, but as a leisure activity that they call sunbathing. Other broadcasts showed the inhabitants consuming chemical compounds that would be lethal toxins to most galactic species, participating in activities that involved deliberate physical danger, and traveling to environments within their own world that would require full environmental protection for any civilized being. They swim in bodies of water with chemical compositions that would dissolve our protective equipment, Dr. Haywan observed, studying biological scans that defied explanation, and they breathed the poisonous atmosphere directly into their respiratory systems without any apparent protective measures. The more they observed, the more disturbing the picture became, as the crew realized they were not watching a species barely surviving on a hostile world, but apex predators who had evolved in conditions so extreme that what the galaxy considered uninhabitable wasteland was their natural paradise. "Captain," Kyung-ho reported from his navigation station, his voice carrying alarm as his sensors detected movement in the space around them. "We have multiple contacts approaching our position, small spacecraft moving in formation, and apparently investigating our location." Jae-sung's compound eyes focused on the tactical display showing primitive but functional spacecraft that had somehow detected their presence despite stealth technology that should have made them invisible to any sensor systems. "How did they find us?" he demanded. But even as he asked the question, he began to suspect that the inhabitants of Sol 3 might have capabilities that galactic science had never encountered. "Unknown, Captain," Chang-min replied, his hands moving to weapons controls while he studied the approaching craft. "Their sensor technology appears to operate on principles different from our own, and they may be using detection methods that are stealth. Systems were not designed to counter." The approaching spacecraft were broadcasting radio signals in patterns that the translation computers were struggling to decode, but the mathematical progressions and repeated sequences suggested attempts at peaceful communication rather than immediate hostility. Dr. Yoonji sat in her laboratory aboard the research station, orbiting the Galactic Council's primary world, surrounded by displays showing data that had arrived from Captain Jae-sung's reconnaissance mission, information so disturbing that she had spent 3 sleepless days analyzing every detail before accepting that her conclusions were accurate. And now she faced the task of presenting findings that would shatter everything the galaxy believed about life and survival. The biological scans from Sol 3 painted a picture that challenged every principle of xenobiology that civilized species had developed over millennia of studying life throughout the galaxy, showing organisms that not only survived in conditions that should have been instantly lethal, but actually thrived in an environment that was more hostile than the worst nightmares of galactic civilization. The gravitational field of Sol 3 measures 1.7 times galactic standard. She spoke into her recording device, documenting evidence that would soon shock the Council. This level of gravitational stress would crush the bone structures of most known species within hours, but the inhabitants have evolved skeletal and muscular systems that use this crushing force to develop physical capabilities far beyond galactic norms. The scans showed beings whose bone density exceeded anything in galactic records, creatures whose muscular systems generated power levels that would be considered superhuman by the standards of civilized species, all because they had evolved under gravitational conditions that most beings would experience as torture. The atmospheric composition contains oxygen concentrations that would cause cellular damage to galactic physiology, she continued, her voice showing the disbelief that accompanied each new discovery. But these organisms have developed respiratory systems that not only tolerate, but require these dangerous chemical levels for basic survival. What the galaxy considered a poisonous atmosphere was actually the life-giving air that the Sol 3 inhabitants breathed naturally, while the radiation levels that would cause immediate cellular breakdown in civilized species seemed to strengthen their immune systems and improve their biological functions. Dr. Yunji activated the holographic display that showed intercepted video transmissions from the planet's surface, recordings that documented behavior so alien that she had initially thought they were viewing some form of military training or survival. Conditioning. Analysis of their recreational activities reveals behavior patterns that would be classified as extreme survival training by galactic military standards, she reported, knowing that her words would be reviewed by council members who would struggle to believe what they were hearing. The recordings showed Sol 3 inhabitants deliberately exposing themselves to their star's harmful radiation for extended periods. Not as a survival necessity, but as a leisure activity they seemed to enjoy, while their children played in conditions that would require full environmental protection for any galactic species. They consume chemical compounds that register as lethal toxins in our biological databases, she continued, highlighting recordings that showed the inhabitants ingesting substances that would kill most civilized beings within minutes. These compounds include ethanol, caffeine, and capsaicin, all of which they consume voluntarily and apparently for pleasure. The implications were staggering as Dr. Yunji realized that what galactic civilization considered deadly poisons were recreational drugs to the inhabitants of Sol 3, substances they consumed routinely without any apparent adverse effects there. Recreational sports involve deliberate exposure to mortal danger, she noted, reviewing recordings that showed Sol 3 inhabitants participating in activities that seemed designed to test the limits of survival. They climb vertical rock faces, without safety equipment, launch themselves from elevated platforms with primitive parachutes, and race vehicles at speeds that would be fatal if they lost control. The recordings showed beings who seemed to seek out dangerous situations for entertainment, challenging themselves against their hostile environment in ways that suggested they had evolved not just to survive extreme conditions, but to actively enjoy overcoming them. Environmental analysis indicates they have inhabited every climate zone on their planet. Dr. Yunji continued, her voice showing amazement at the scope of adaptation she was documenting. From Arctic regions with temperatures that would freeze galactic physiology solid, to desert environments with heat levels that would cause immediate dehydration and death. The Sol 3 inhabitants had not just survived in a single hostile environment, but had spread across their entire world, adapting to and conquering every extreme condition their planet could offer, from the crushing depths of their oceans to the oxygen-starved heights of their mountains. Cultural analysis reveals aggressive expansion tendencies, she reported, knowing that this finding would particularly concern the galactic military advisors. Their historical records show continuous territorial expansion and resource acquisition, with competition between different groups driving technological advancement at rates far exceeding galactic norms. The inhabitants of Sol 3 did not just cooperate for survival, but actively competed with each other in ways that accelerated their development, turning their hostile environment into a laboratory for rapid evolution and technological progress. Communications specialist Dong Min had spent days decoding the radio transmissions that Captain Jae Sung's mission had intercepted, and his findings added another layer of concern to Dr. Yunji's biological analysis. Their communication patterns reveal complex social structures with multiple competing civilizations sharing the same planet. He reported, his analysis showing political and social complexity that matched their biological adaptations. They regularly engage in organized conflict over resources and territory, but they also cooperate on projects that require planetary-scale coordination. The inhabitants of Sol 3 seem to have mastered the art of competition and cooperation simultaneously, fighting each other for advantage while working together when their survival or advancement required unified effort. Historical records intercepted from their data networks show a pattern of accelerating technological development driven by competitive pressure, Dongmin continued. his voice showing concern at the implications. "They have progressed from primitive tool use to spaceflight in a time frame that most galactic species would consider impossibly short. While most civilizations took millennia to develop from basic technology to space travel, the Sol 3 inhabitants had compressed this development into a period that was barely a fraction of galactic evolutionary timescales. Most disturbing," Dongmin added, "their entertainment media includes fictional scenarios where they conquer galactic civilizations, defeat cosmic threats, and establish dominance over advanced alien species. The inhabitants of Sol 3 entertained themselves with stories about conquering exactly the kind of advanced civilizations that existed in galactic space, suggesting that they had already considered the possibility of encountering and defeating species like those represented in the Galactic Council Doctor." Yunji compiled her final report with growing unease as she realized that every aspect of Sol 3 civilization seemed designed to produce beings that were not just survivors, but apex predators on a cosmic scale. "Conclusion," she spoke into her recording device, her voice heavy with the implications of her findings. "The inhabitants of Sol 3 represent an evolutionary path that galactic science has never encountered, a species that has adapted to extreme conditions not by avoiding danger, but by embracing it and using it as a tool for continuous improvement. The biological data showed creatures whose physical capabilities exceeded galactic norms in every measurable category, while their cultural patterns revealed a species that thrived on challenge and competition in ways that most civilized beings would find incomprehensible. They are persistence predators on a planetary scale," she continued, using terminology that would chill every military advisor in the galaxy. "They do not simply adapt to hostile environments, but actively seek out and conquer new challenges, using each success as a stepping stone to greater achievements." Reconnaissance data showed that the Sol 3 inhabitants were already developing technologies that would allow them to leave their hostile world and venture into galactic space, bringing their extreme adaptations and competitive drive to civilizations that had never faced anything like them. "Recommendation," Dr. Yunji concluded, knowing that her words would influence policy decisions that could affect the entire galaxy. "Immediate reclassification of Sol 3 and its inhabitants is required, as current protocols are inadequate for dealing with a species that exhibits these characteristics." Her report would reach the Galactic Council within hours, carried by emergency communications that would interrupt normal business and demand immediate attention from representatives who thought they understood the nature of life in the universe. As Dr. Yunji transmitted her findings, she wondered if galactic civilization was prepared for the revelation that somewhere in the dangerous depths of space there existed beings who considered the galaxy's worst nightmares to be their natural habitat. The data from Sol 3 suggested that the universe contained possibilities for life that were far more extreme and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the Great Crystal Chamber with unprecedented urgency. Representatives from 47 different species gathering in person rather than through holographic projection, because the information they were about to discuss was too dangerous to risk interception by unauthorized listeners, and Senior Counselor Wu Jin's ancient face showed the strain of processing revelations that challenged everything he had learned during his centuries of service to galactic civilization. Senior Military Advisor Sung Wu stood at the central platform, his species' natural armor plates shifting to deep red colors that indicated extreme agitation as he presented tactical analysis that had kept his entire staff awake for 3 consecutive days, reviewing and re-reviewing data that seemed too dangerous to be real. The tactical implications of Dr. Yunji's biological analysis are beyond anything in our military planning scenarios, he began, his voice carrying the controlled fear of a professional soldier who had suddenly realized that all of his training might be inadequate. These Sol 3 inhabitants do not simply fight for resources or territory as civilized species do, but they wage warfare for abstract concepts that they call honor, freedom, and ideology. The chamber filled with sounds of distress from various species as they absorbed information about beings who would risk death not for survival or material gain, but for ideas that existed only in their minds, a level of commitment to conflict that exceeded anything in galactic military experience. Their historical warfare records show that they have weaponized everything from basic chemistry to atomic physics. Sheng Wu continued, his analysis revealing capabilities that made every galactic military doctrine obsolete. They have developed explosive devices using their planet's atmospheric gases, projectile weapons that accelerate metal fragments to velocities that would penetrate most galactic armor, and energy weapons based on principles that our scientists are still trying to understand. Representative Boram from the Stellar Assembly, her long neck trembling with emotion, interrupted with a question that reflected the concerns of every peaceful species in the galaxy. Surely these are primitive weapons that pose no threat to advanced galactic technology. Sung Wu's armor plates shifted to an even deeper red as he activated displays showing intercepted technical specifications that had been decoded from Sol 3 communication networks, documents that revealed technological capabilities far more advanced than their crude appearance suggested. Their weapons technology may appear primitive, but it is specifically designed to function in the extreme conditions of their homeworld, he explained, his voice showing professional respect for adversaries he hoped never to face in combat. Equipment that can survive and function in Sol 3's hostile environment would be extremely difficult to disable or destroy using conventional galactic methods. The implications became even more disturbing as Sheng Wu revealed that Sol 3 weapons were designed to work without the sophisticated support systems that galactic technology required, making them nearly impossible to disable through electronic warfare or system disruption. Most concerning, he continued, their tactical doctrines emphasize adaptability and improvisation rather than standardized procedures, which means they can modify their strategies faster than our analysis systems can predict their behavior. Ambassador Yeon Su from the Peaceful Commerce Guild, whose species had built their civilization on trade and negotiation, rose to propose the solution that her people always preferred when facing potential conflicts. Surely these beings can be reasoned with, she suggested, her musical voice carrying the optimism that had made her species successful mediators throughout the galaxy. If we approach them with offers of trade and cultural exchange, we can establish peaceful relations and avoid any potential conflicts. Her proposal was met with silence until Intelligence Officer Chang Min activated a new set of displays showing intercepted entertainment media from Sol 3, recordings that demonstrated how the inhabitants viewed contact with alien civilizations. Their fictional entertainment includes scenarios where they encounter advanced galactic civilizations, he reported, his gravelly voice showing the concern that his analysis had produced. In most of these stories, they either conquer the alien species through superior tactics and determination, or they form alliances that result in humans becoming the dominant partners. The entertainment records showed beings who imagined themselves as galactic conquerors, spreading their extreme adaptations and competitive culture throughout civilized space, turning the galaxy into an extension of their hostile homeworld. They do not see advanced technology as something to fear or respect, Chang Min continued, but as a challenge to overcome and a prize to be claimed through courage and determination. The Sol 3 inhabitants seem to view the galaxy not as a community of civilized species to join, but as a frontier to be conquered and settled according to their own aggressive expansion patterns. There is more, Chang Min added, activating recordings that showed the depths of Sol 3 competitive culture. Their entertainment media celebrates individuals who overcome impossible odds through refusing to surrender, and they appear to consider survival against overwhelming opposition to be the highest form of achievement. The recordings showed beings who entertained themselves with stories about never giving up, fighting against hopeless odds, and achieving victory through determination that other species would consider insane rather than heroic. Dr. Yunji, whose biological analysis had started this emergency session, presented additional findings that made the situation even more alarming for galactic civilization. Long-range sensor data indicates they are already developing interstellar capabilities, she reported, her voice carrying scientific fascination mixed with deep concern. Their primitive spacecraft are crude by our standards, but they are functional and show signs of rapid improvement. The technical analysis revealed that Sol 3 inhabitants were not content to remain on their hostile homeworld, but were actively working to spread their extreme adaptations throughout galactic space. Projection models suggest they will achieve faster than light, travel within 50 to 100 galactic standard cycles, she continued. And their expansion patterns indicate they will not limit themselves to uninhabited systems. The Sol 3 inhabitants showed all the characteristics of a species that would colonize any world they could reach, regardless of whether it was already inhabited by civilized species. Most disturbing, Dr. Yunji added. Their biological adaptations suggest they could survive on worlds that we consider habitable, but their presence would make those worlds uninhabitable for us. The apex predators from the wasteland world could not only survive in galactic space, but could transform habitable worlds into extensions of their hostile homeworld, creating environments where only they could thrive. Senior Counselor Wu Jin called for order as the chamber erupted in sounds of distress from species who realized that their assumptions about safe expansion and peaceful coexistence might be completely wrong. The question before us, he announced, his ancient voice carrying the authority of his position, is how to classify these beings and determine appropriate protocols for potential future contact. Representative Komin from the Merchant Guild, whose people had survived, by understanding economic and political realities, spoke with the practical wisdom that had made his species successful traders. We must consider the possibility that avoiding contact might not be an option, he said, his voice showing the concern of someone who understood that economic systems could not function under constant threat. If they achieve interstellar travel, they will eventually encounter galactic civilization, whether we want them to or not. The debate that followed lasted for hours as representatives struggled with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about civilized behavior and peaceful coexistence. Some suggested immediate military action to prevent Sol 3 from developing interstellar capabilities, while others proposed establishing defensive barriers around galactic space to keep the dangerous beings contained in their own system. Military action against Sol 3 would require approaching their homeworld, Seungwoo pointed out, his tactical analysis revealing the impossibility of conventional warfare against beings adapted to extreme conditions. Our forces cannot operate effectively in their environment, while they appear to thrive in conditions that would disable our equipment and kill our personnel. The military option seemed hopeless because any attack on Sol 3 would have to be conducted under conditions that favored the defenders who had evolved specifically to fight in such hostile environments. Defensive barriers would require technology we do not possess, added Chief Science Officer Hae-won, her analysis showing the technical challenges of containing a species that was actively developing space travel. And there is no guarantee that beings capable of surviving on Sol 3 could not eventually overcome any barriers we might construct. As the debate continued, the representatives gradually realized that they were facing a completely new type of challenge, a species that could not be defeated through conventional means, could not be contained through existing technology, and could not be negotiated with using normal diplomatic protocols.